Today I presented on some research that I'm involved with, which is a large-scale longitudinal study of Syrian refugee adolescents and Jordanian host community adolescents, basically trying to understand how stress impacts them, how the effects of war and displacement impact them on a psychological level, yes, but also on a physiological level. So I particularly talked about the use of biomarkers. Biomarkers are basically biological markers, so sort of little things within your biology that can give some sense of the types of stress that you've been exposed to. So I talked about cortisol, hair cortisol particularly, which is hair cortisol is a measure of chronic stress. I talked about CRP, C-reactive protein, which is a measure of inflammation, and I talked about EBV, the Epstein-Barr virus, which is a measure of immune function. And basically the idea is that if you look at these biomarkers, then you can kind of see what is the physiological response to stress for kids. So what we found is that hair cortisol, particularly, is a really cool measure of chronic stress exposure. And basically, if you want to get hair cortisol, then you take a little bit of hair from the back of the head, and if you look at the centimeter closest to the scalp, that reflects about 1 month of hair growth. And 1 month of hair growth then is kind of corresponding to the stress that the kids have experienced over the month before. So by using cortisol, hair cortisol, you can see, well, what has their stress been for the month before you've collected it. And when we did this, we found that this Mercy Corps developed intervention called Advancing Adolescence, that it can actually reduce hair cortisol, so reduce chronic stress in adolescents, in refugee and host community adolescents in Jordan, which is really cool because it's basically showing that you can change the physiological response of adolescents in response to an intervention. As far as inflammation and immune function, so CRP and EBV, we didn't find any response to the intervention, but we do find some interesting predictors of that. More work is needed to understand that. I think that most people would probably think the most difficult part is to get refugee kids to give up a little bit of their hair or to get a blood spot, which is how you get the biomarker, the CRP and the EBV. But actually this is not the most difficult. When you explain to children and parents or adolescents and parents about why you're doing this, they tend to be really on board. So in our sample of 817 kids, we had about 730 who gave their hair and who gave their blood, which is a huge response rate. So part of that is that we explained it, and part of it is that we also, when we took the hair cortisol, we gave them a free haircut, so a professional hairdresser did their hair, so we kind of incentivized it a little bit, but also just they were interested to help out the research. They want other refugees and other kids living in areas exposed to war to do well, and so they wanted to help that effort. The actual hardest part is, for me, because my role as analysis, is probably making sure that you're doing the analyses in a fine-grained way, in a specific way, but still getting these kind of generalizable results. Trying to really understand what's happening for individual kids, but also for the big group. The most inspiring part of the research is that we did find that the intervention had an effect. So we ran this randomized controlled trial. That's a trial where kids are randomly assigned to the wait list or the experimental group. And we found that not only did it prove their self-reported mental health, but it also improved their physiological health, which is just really cool. It suggests that some of these effects of war and displacement are malleable, are reversible, and if we can just provide the right resources to kids who are in serious need, then we can help them out. We can improve their well-being, or at least decrease their mental health problems. The other coolest thing is that we developed a measure of resilience that's for use specifically with Arabic-speaking adolescents, and so we found that there was a number of different kind of predictors of resilience. And so one of the kind of cool things about the research was that we didn't just focus on sort of negative outcomes, but also on what can help them to do well. I didn't talk about that in my presentation today, but we have this really great child and youth resilience measure for Arabic-speaking adolescents that can help kind of understand their psychological resilience, but also the relational protective factors and the community protective factors around them.